If you grew up like I did, you would expect an altar call right now. Right, Shelley? That was the altar call song. We're not having one. You're safe. Just as I am too. Whoever just said that, you're right. It was that one was too. Yeah. In 2012, Heather and I were living in Los Angeles in a little town named Encino, famous for Encino Man. It's basically the only reason. And our church was doing great. We had some pretty impressive growth, and God was showing up in ways that I never expected or planned for. And then I got a call from my dear friend Melissa, who had gotten a rare form of cancer between the flap of her esophagus and her stomach, which was virtually untreatable. She was the first 30-year-old woman in recorded medical history to have this form of cancer. It was usually the kind that was for older men in their 70s and 80s. Shortly after, Melissa died, and I was struck by that experience in new ways as a young pastor losing a dear friend. Less than 5 months later, I had met this wonderful new member of our congregation, and he asked me to take him to get a colonoscopy. So I took him, he went and had his colonoscopy, and then I picked him up after and took him home, and he was great. And then we had scheduled coffee for the next day. And the next morning, I was at his house and realized that he had died by suicide that morning. Fast forward 4 months after that, one of our beloved church members who was an usher and was the most faithful human you could possibly experience, named Dwayne, who'd been battling cancer for 10 years or so. I was taking him dinner, and I was the person who found him and spent the next month trying to figure out as a pastor how to sell 450 firearms that he had left to the church. You think your job's weird. Grief, loss, exhaustion. All the while, God was doing these kind of incredible things that I couldn't make sense of, and yet inside, stuff was happening with me that I didn't have words to express. So by the grace of God, we got a sabbatical in 2015, 14. And I took off to Ireland and was doing a retreat in Northern Ireland. And our retreat guide took us out onto this bridge that was, the back side of the bridge was a dam. And the front side of the bridge was the entire valley of Northern Ireland headed south into the Republic of Ireland. This was easier at 8:30. And our tour guide said, our spiritual director said, I want you to look back at this dam and all that is being held. And I want you to release that, but then I want you to look forward and I want you to see what the future holds. And I looked forward and all I could think about was death. And I looked back and all I could see was what I had been holding. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch. It shows up even when you're doing the right things. You show up, you follow through, you stay engaged, you care deeply, you keep going. And hear me, church, it's not just in darkness. You ever had a baby? A few? Yeah. Some of you 4 or 5, that's crazy. And still, something feels thin. You might feel reactive more quickly than you used to. You might feel numb in places that used to make you feel alive. You might feel disconnected from yourself, even while staying committed to others. Church, this kind of exhaustion doesn't come from laziness or lack of faith. It often comes from carrying and caring too much for too long without naming what is really happening inside. Most of us were taught to not talk openly about this kind of exhaustion. So we learn to manage it. We learn to push it down or to push through it. We learn to explain it away. We learn to spiritualize it. And we tell ourselves that this is what faithfulness looks like. We assume that our tiredness is the price of commitment. We assume that strength means moving through it all without complaint. But over time, these assumptions settle into our bones. So this Lent, we're beginning a journey called emotionally healthy spirituality, rooted in the scriptures and the beautiful work of Pete Scazzaro. And we're starting at the holding of so many things because I think this is where, for many of us, the spiritual struggle begins. It begins when our faith moves forward while our inner life gets left behind. Where over the months and the years, we lose the intentionality behind connection and relationship with our neighbor and with God and with ourselves. So here's the foundational claim that we're going to keep returning to over the next 6 weeks of our Lenten journey. You cannot be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. You can't be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Our spiritual maturity and our emotional maturity grow together. They're not separate paths, they're companions. They're deeply connected expressions of a whole life with God, not a fragmented life. So when grief goes unnamed, and when anger is buried, and when limits are ignored, and when the vulnerability in our life is avoided, our spiritual growth becomes fragile. It may continue outwardly for a while, but eventually something gives way. It leaks, right? That's one of the things I learned in my sabbatical is I thought all those things that I was holding weren't leaking on the people I loved. Heather can tell you otherwise. So relationships strain, and frequently the ones who get it are the people who are at home because we've been taught, keep a good look, right? You'll see on the screen this iceberg, and you'll see an iceberg in the hallway that Gary painted because there's all this stuff on the surface that people see, but it's so much deeper underneath. And our faith becomes brittle, and our joy thins out, and the body begins to speak what the soul's been holding. But church, this isn't failure. It's a signal. It's a sign that our body is giving us. Psalm 139 gives us language for this moment. Oh Lord, you have searched me and you know me. The psalmist isn't describing some form of casual knowing. It's not some surface familiarity. It's an intimate, patient attention of God. He goes on to say that God knows me when I sit down and when I rise up. God understands their thoughts before they're fully formed. God is familiar with every movement of their life. And the psalmist doesn't rush past this awareness, but instead lingers there. God's knowing reaches places that we usually like to edit out. The public self and our private self are both seen. The faithful self and the fearful self are both held. The confident self and the anxious self are both fully known. Now, unless you think the psalmist likes this, it's a great poem because he says, man, I tried every escape from God. I went up to the heavens, God, and you were there. So then I descended into the depths, and you were there. I even tried to hide in the darkness, but the darkness can't conceal me from you. And for the psalmist, this isn't a threat. It's not some weird stalky God who's searching after him. This is reassurance that there is no emotional state or interior experience or external expression, no hidden fear or unresolved grief that places us outside of the presence of God. God was already there, attentive, compassionate. The psalm ends with a prayer that shapes our entire Lenten journey. Search me, O God. Know my heart. Test me. Know my anxious thoughts. See if there are any hurtful ways inside of me. And lead me into the way everlasting. This isn't an abstract prayer for quick change. This is a prayer for truth. A prayer for awareness, a prayer to be fully seen. The psalmist is inviting God to illuminate what is already present. And this prayer trusts that what is revealed is going to be met with guidance, not condemnation, not judgment. Now, this kind of prayer runs against what much of us were taught about faith. Not often by words, but by the faithful people around us that we watched. We learned to stay busy, stay useful, stay composed. We learned to serve without listening to ourselves. We learned to carry responsibility without naming the costs. And over time, we spiritualize these behaviors. Over-functioning begins to be described as faithfulness. And constant busyness, we call devotion. And emotional restraint, we call maturity. And religious performance is called depth. But the fruit tells a different story. Because people become exhausted and reactive. Relationships grow strained. Faith feels heavy inside instead of life-giving like it used to. And the practices that once nourished us now simply feel hollow and void. But Jesus speaks directly to this. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Now, frequently, when we think about Jesus and the time of Jesus, I think it's a little bit too idyllic. We forget that the roadways in the time of Jesus were lined with crucified people because they were living under rule of an empire. So Jesus isn't talking to people who feel like they got it all together all the time. It's made clear every day to them how much they don't have it together. And Jesus addresses these people who are worn down from carrying weight for too long. Church, the stuff that is happening in our world is too heavy for us to carry alone. It's too much. Sometimes by the third notification I get on my phone by 9:30 in the morning, I just want to go back to bed. And that's what's happening in the world, not necessarily what's happening in me. This weariness is not about a lack of belief. It's about sustained strain. And Jesus invites them into rest, not by removing the responsibility of their faith journey, but by offering them a different way to carry it. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Now, this isn't an egg yolk, in case you didn't grow up in the country like I did. A yoke is this strip of wood that binds multiple animals together. And frequently, because animals are different sizes, the yoke is carved specifically for the beast that it's being fed upon. A yoke joins beings together so that their load is shared. Now, if you want a fun rabbit hole at the end of today, go do a little study on yokes. Because a single steer or bull can pull 2,000 pounds on their own. But you yoke two together, and they can do 15 tons. See, Jesus isn't offering an escape from our effort. He's offering a shared load, offering companionship and alignment. He's inviting people into a way of life that fits more truly who we are, and that being yoked to Christ allows us to carry all of those things that we don't think we can carry anymore. It gives us the strength to do so. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. This word easy actually is well-fitting. My yoke is well-fitting for you. He speaks of a way of living that aligns with the shape of our humanity, rather than fighting against us. See, much of the exhaustion that we carry comes from expectations and responsibilities and emotional weight that we were never meant to carry alone. And frankly, sometimes that we just create in our head. Faith becomes heavy when it becomes disconnected from honesty. And life becomes strained when emotions are ignored rather than integrated. So Lent gives us the space to name this, the space for telling some truth. It's a season for slowing down enough to notice what has been asking of your attention inside of you. Because God's not standing outside of our lives waiting for us to get it right. God is present within every moment, working with us as we are working. Transformation unfolds through relationship and honesty and vulnerability and time. Grace is not the reward for self-awareness. Grace is what makes self-awareness possible. Get this, church. Grace is not simply a gift for your sin. It was a gift that was present before you were even born. It was a gift that was sown into the fabric of our universe before you were even a thought in your parents' mind, before any brokenness in you ever occurred. It was there in the beginning, and it is here now. And God's not waiting for us to become whole before loving us. Instead, like the psalmist said, God meets us in that space, in the middle of our fragmentation, and patiently invites us into integration. This means our emotional lives matter to God. That anger you're feeling in relationship to our world right now matters. It's telling you something. That grief that you're carrying that you think's not leaking, it matters. That fear you hold, it matters. That anxiety that you're carrying matters. So does the joy, and so does that part in you that says, hey, I think that's too much, Rustin. Those limits, I hate limits. When these dimensions of our lives are ignored, faith doesn't become stronger, it becomes divided and more fragmented. This is one of the most common struggles I see as a pastor. People who love God deeply, but have never learned to listen to their inner life. They pray regularly, but rarely notice how they feel. They serve faithfully, but they don't know how to rest. They believe sincerely, but they struggle to name their own emotion. They lead competently, but feel disconnected from themselves. And here's the truth. Eventually, something cracks. A relationship reaches a breaking point. Our bodies demand attention, and we end up in the emergency room. Faith loses its vitality. Meaning feels harder to access, and so we kind of just become numb. Church, this is not spiritual failure. This is an invitation to a deeper, more integrated life. If you're feeling this, it's not judgment, it's a awakening. So this Lent, we're choosing to slow down. We're choosing attention over avoidance. We're choosing honesty over performance. And we're choosing integration over fragmentation. And each week, we're going to invite you into a spiritual practice. And if you're watching the daily devotionals, we're going to invite you to that same practice every day. This week, it's a simple form of the daily examen, shaped around emotional awareness. So at the end of your day, each day this week, I want you to pause in the presence of God and ask yourself 2 questions. Where did I feel most alive today? And where did I feel most depleted? Then don't judge the answers. Just write them down. Don't try to fix them. Just simply notice them. And trust that God is already present in both of those spaces. Whether you're in the heavens or whether you're in the depths, God is with you. This practice forms the foundation for an emotionally healthy spirituality. It trains us to pay attention to what's happening within us and to bring our whole selves into relationship with God. I love that Psalm 139 ends with trust rather than certainty. It doesn't say, God, you know all this, and so I've got everything under control. He says, Search me, know me. Any stuff that's messy, show it. And then lead me into the way that is everlasting. Not a destination, a posture. And Matthew 11 ends with rest rather than instruction. It's one of my favorite realities of the scripture. Elijah goes through this battle with these prophets of Baal, and he wins. God does everything Elijah asks, and then Elijah gets really depressed. And God tells him, hey, Elijah, go eat and take a nap. Because sometimes that's what's happening inside of us. Jesus says, rest. Come and rest with me. So this Lent is an invitation not to do more, but an invitation to be more honest. To notice where faith that we've been carrying is maybe holding more than it can hold on its own. To recognize where our busyness has replaced presence. To allow grief and anger and limits to come into the light of God's care and to be yoked with Christ. So I want to leave you with an opening rather than a conclusion. What might God be asking you to notice about yourself if you slowed down? Where have you been carrying weight alone? Where has your faith moved faster than your inner life could follow? Don't rush to the answers. Just notice. The God who searches and knows you is already there with you. And the God who invites you to rest is not afraid about what's true in you. And the God who walks with us through Lent meets us exactly where we are. And then let's see what unfolds. Please pray with me. God, we carry a lot. We hold it and we shove it and we stuff it down. We pretend like it's not real. And amidst all of this stuff that's happening in the world, we try to make sense of it and hold all of that too. God, it's exhausting. Meet us here. Meet us in the midst of all of it. Yoke us with you.